Hello, everyone. Just finishing up getting organized and started here in a second. Organizing everything kind of between my two screens, making sure the setup has a good flow. I don't need the chat. Gotcha. Gotcha. But you're up very, very late. I hope you're driving safely over there to Iwala. Mental note, I had a mention about Iwala in here. Do. That's hot. It's a good thing for coffee. All right. The house is empty. Kids are off getting their hairs cut. Life is good. Let's look over these notes one more time. And talk about airlines in the news. Harrison Ford, Japan 4 flight. Oh, Garmin. There's one more. Garmin did. Dude, dude. Garmin. Oh yeah. What Garmin's doing with Garmin Pilot is airlines in the nude. We wish we were nude. We'd probably get better press if airlines were nude. Right. Need to come back to here. Here. Do you know what's kind of funny, Mariana? You say that small print on the tickets. Do you know the contract of carriage for my airline is 52 pages long? Yeah, it's not fine print. It's full size sign print. No one just chooses to read it. 52 pages long. It covers everything with the contract of carriage. All right. Backs up. Moving well. Chat rooms chatting. Good, 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 good. I need like fourth. I've decided. Right, let's do this. That's that's there. Whoop whoop. Good, good. That's Turned off, volume up just a little. There we go. Blind Life Podcast, episode 24, recorded May 5th, 2017. Welcome to the Flying Life Podcast, the podcast about just that flying, aviation, and my life. I'm Dispatcher Mike, a dispatcher for a major airline based here in the United States. In this episode, we'll be talking about airlines being in the spotlight in the news for passenger service, uh, fallout from passenger removal. Harrison Ford, Jeppesen, and For Flight are going to be just announced a partnership, something I'm very excited about. And then we're going to talk about enhancements to Garmin Pilot. So a lot of good news in the general aviation electronic flight bag world. And then for a topic this week, I interviewed Max Trescott, CFI, Garmin G1000 expert, and host of a new podcast. We talked about him about all of those things. And then in the life, we're talking about Star Wars Day, weight loss, and chasing that little baby around. I'm gonna start calling her a terrorist because man, she keeps us on her feet. So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the news. All right off the bat, we're gonna start with the airlines that have been in the news. All of them, all three major airlines have seemed to have some bad PR lately, and it all started early last month, just after Sun Fun, so mid-April, with United on a Republic Airlines operated flight that dragged a doctor off of the aircraft and which caused him, personal injury, bloodied his face and all of that. That started this avalanche of bad PR rolling for the airlines. And from there, I went to American, and they had a video come out with a American Airlines flight attendant and a passenger, and, it was blown way out of proportion. And then Delta decided to jump on the bandwagon as well with kicking off a guy that just wanted to go to the bathroom on taxi out, or that's at least what the story says. And then just yesterday, back in April 23rd, these people wait almost a week and a half to come out with their horrible video. Um, we kicked Delta kicked a family off of the airplane. And we'll get into that a little bit. But all these, I mean, this is bad. It seems that the media is just hyper focused on the airlines, and they just really seem like they're bullying up and beating up on us for basic common stuff. Uh, and it comes down basically to this, in my opinion. Uh, News agencies are for-profit businesses. They're not a public service. They are not for profit. They need to make money. And airline news agencies make airline by selling advertisements, and they sell advertisements by getting ratings for people to watch them on their shows, or they buy clicks on their internet sites. And they can sell ads by the amount of clicks that they get. And obviously, these airline stories are big revenue makers for the news agencies. It is, um, as someone that works in the airline industry, it's kinda annoying. Maybe they should go beat up on McDonald's, you know? When's the last time you've had an order come right from a fast food restaurant, yet they don't seem to get thrown under the bus? I understand it's not the same scale, but it's a little different. So we'll talk briefly about each of these things. I'm going off the top of my memory from what I said because I really don't want to talk about each incident too deeply. Um, all that said, so the United dragging the doctor off a flight from Chicago to Nashville. The flight was oversold because the airline, Republic Airlines, needed to move a crew down to Louisville to um, to operate the flight back in or a flight back in the morning. Now this happens all the time. Cruise deadhead, we use our own aircraft to move our pilots, our flight attendants on them. They um it's normal. It's something we do, and a lot of times it's something that has to come up last minute. We do it last minute because we find out. And so this crew was booked. For some reason, the gate agent didn't realize that the crew was booked on the flight. Therefore, they get out. Um, not they get out. They showed up, and all the people are on the airplane. And they offered as much money as they can, and they um, off money they can to the passengers. The people still didn't want to get off the airplane, so then they went through and had to deny boarding to three people. Um, when an airline has to deny boarding, we always prefer to do that before people are actually on the airplane. In my experience from the operational world, and I'm sure gate age would see, it's easier to deny a person boarding when they're in the gatehouse than when they're already on the seat. It's happened before. I've been personally taken off of an aircraft before, and that's when I was jump seating on another carrier to go see a friend, and um, there was just one seat that was still open, and that person hadn't shown up yet. And the gate agent told me, "Go ahead and take it, but if they show up within the next 2 or 3 minutes, then I'm gonna have to take you off." And that's kinda what happened. Um, but I didn't cause a stink about it. I didn't mash or wail. I just got off the airplane. So, gate agent boarded these people. People didn't wanna get off. Police were called. Police officers then used, some sort of excessive force on this doctor, and, uh, and then everyone had their cell phone cameras out. So, that's what happened there. And then a couple of weeks later, or about a week later, there was an American Airlines flight attendant that had a, incident with a, passenger and a stroller. Again, the videos, rolled, but again, in all of these videos, you don't see what happened up until the point where the person gets kicked off the airplane. They conveniently edit that part out. You miss it. You don't get to see it. Um, because if you get to see it, it wouldn't be a news story because everyone realized that this person was not acting accordingly. So, in this case, the American Airlines mother with two twins brings her stroller all the way to the back of the airplane to put her kids down. First of all, how she got a double stroller through the aisle boggles my mind because those are quite large, and there's no place to put a stroller in the back of an airplane. There's just it's not feasible, not possible. There's no room for a stroller back there. So the flight attendant picked up the stroller. Apparently, he hit the lady in the head, and things escalated from there. Uh, so that's what happened with that. Delta was in the news earlier because they kicked a guy off because he needed to go to the bathroom. I'm pretty sure that's not why he got kicked off the airplane. Most flight attendants use common sense before the while on taxi out. We all know on taxi out that all the passengers need to be seated um, and with their seatbelts fastened. They say it over and over again in the safety video. And when the crew's about ready to push back, they say that you need to be seated and the airplane can't move until everyone's seated. So this guy decides that he needs to go to the bathroom and he stands up and walks to the bathroom and all of that. Apparently, uh, I'm I'm just gut feeling here. He did a little bit more to uh he did a little bit more than just want to go to the bathroom. It, common sense and human decency doesn't show that, hey, this guy's about to wet his pants. We can't let him go to the bathroom because we're taxing. Um, so there's got to be way more to this story than that's being let out to. And then just recently, um, the Delta was also in the news because a family of four, uh, really a family of four adults and one lap child, were flying between Maui and LA, and one of the adults in their party took a different flight. So they took a different flight on a different airline or a different aircraft to get to Los Angeles. And this family assumed that they had already that that seat would just be left open because uh, that person took another flight. Well, that's not the case. When you don't show up for a flight, then the airline's going to put someone else in that seat. So they had to put their car seat in there. So now they have an infant in arms, which is any child under the age of 2 is allowed to fly basically for free as long as they sit in the lap of a parent. So they put the car seat in that open seat, which they thought was still there, and all from there, when the airline then gave a seat to another passenger, they got really upset about that because they, quote, "paid for that seat," but in reality, they didn't. They gave up the rights to that seat when that person didn't show up for their that seat. Um, it all goes in through the contract of carriage. Um, that doesn't get explained very well, and then the, um airline gave the people 2 choices. Basically, you need to get the car seat out of the seat so this person can sit in it, or you need to get off the airplane. And so then these people chose to get off the airplane, and now they're saying that the airline kicked them off the airplane. So, again, big story, big shock. Again, it's just people not understanding the rules, and maybe the rules weren't explained very well to them at the time. So, what's the fallout from all of this? Delta and United have empowered their gate agents and are now saying that they can offer up to $9,950 uh, in credit or money to get people for denied boarding if a flight is oversold, which we'll talk about overselling flights here in a second. That'll that'll happen. They can empower those. Southwest Airlines has said that they're gonna stop overbooking flights, period. They're just not gonna do it. Um, so that's what they're choosing to do. American, I don't believe has changed any policies at all. And all of these have changed the way that I have do my job differently. Whenever I hear that we're taking a passenger off the airplane for whatever reason, now we dig. We dig to get as much of the story as possible, and in my job, I have to do reports. I have to do a report whenever, we take a passenger off an airplane. We call it passenger misconduct. Anytime there's any sort of passenger misconduct, we do a report that gets sent out throughout the airline, and I think the amount of passenger misconduct reports that I do is now increased. I write everything up. I page everything out because I don't know if there's one that, I don't know if there's gonna be a video. I don't know if this is gonna come up 2 weeks later with some made up story that the news is gonna run with. So I wanna make sure that all the facts are out there and everyone knows about it so people can gather information so in case this does come out, this, this does show up. So that's what I do differently. Um, Also, whenever I have crews deadheading, I had this happen when it was just a last minute thing. There was an equipment change, and we needed to um, move a flight crew to a city, I called the airport, and then I called the gate themselves to say, "Hey, look, this is happening, this is coming, this is the number amount of people, and they are must ride. They have to be on the airplane because 'cause they're gonna be operating a flight as soon as they get down there." I remember it was 3 flight attendants that I needed to get down to Miami or Fort Lauderdale, so we put them on there, and I gave them names and PNRs and all of that, so that empowered the gate agent to know to leave 3 seats open, that these 3 people are actually gonna come here and, don't do anything like that. So, um, let's talk quickly about overbooking. Airlines overbook flights because there's statistical data on every single flight, city, and departure time to the number of people that will miss their flight. And airlines like to maximize their revenue and they like to have all of their seats full if possible. And this happens out of hubs, and this happens there's a number of reasons why people miss flights. They don't set their alarm clock, they wake up late, car troubles, and then even in hubs and major hubs, if there's a maintenance issue or weather issue that's causing a delay on their flight, well, they're gonna miss their connection. And so airlines like to maximize their revenue, and we don't generally see a point where we leave hundreds of people behind or 10 or 15. Generally speaking, our math is and statistics are pretty spot on where there, even if we do oversell a flight, we're still gonna get everyone that shows up on the flight. And I see that when I travel non-revenue and when I non-rev with the family and all of that. We'll show up, and all of a sudden, the flight's oversold by 4, and we're sitting there, numbers 1 through 4 on the wait list, and we get on the flight. Well, if I'm getting on the flight as a non-revenue standby passenger who only gets the leftovers, we're like the dogs underneath the Thanksgiving Day table getting the scraps of the seats. That means all the revenue passengers have gotten on the flight. So if all the revenue passengers have gotten on the flight, then guess what? Overselling works. Um, and then we see that, and there are some flights that we have where the no-show factor is 20 or 30 people, and these are big long-haul international flights. But there are some large amounts of no-show factors on some city pairs that we have. So overbooking is not the problem. I honestly think the problem in all of this is sensationalism by the media is the first big problem. The second problem is people feel are entitled, and it's entitleism by these people. So I think that talks enough about the airlines. I think they're getting beat up enough. So let's go ahead and play. All right, let's talk about some happy news. And happy news is in Harrison Ford, Han Solo, uh, Indiana Jones, famous actor who accidentally landed his airplane on a taxiway at Bob Hope, John Wayne. Actually, not Bob Hope. It's John Wayne. Bob Hope's a different airport in Southern California. At John Wayne, Orange County, on February 13th, flying over the top of American Airlines jet. He wasn't going to face any FAA certificate action, which I think is great. And I honestly think that he played it the right way. And some tapes came out from TMZ just after the incident of him calling the tower and apologizing and saying, "Hey, I'm the idiot that just landed on the taxiway. What do you need from me?" And uh, my guess is that he probably filled out a NASA report. This is an ASRS, Air Safety Reporting System, that is held up by NASA. Allows for pilots and people to report A, things that they did wrong, or B, things they feel unsafe. And as of that, there's a guarantee of immunity if you self disclose. and you're able to self-disclose if, um and you get this immunity. I believe it's, once a year, maybe something more than that, greater amount of time. But the FAA allows you to do this because it allows them to then collect data and see trends in safety concerns that, they can go through and then issue safety bulletins about like that. So, uh, I think it's good, and I honestly do not think it's because he's a famous actor, that's why he's getting off the hook. I honestly think it's because, he's a smart aviator idiot excuse me, about to sneeze. Excuse me. Thank God we can edit that out in post-production. Honestly don't think it's because he's a famous actor. I honestly think it's because, um, he's an aviator and he followed the rules just like everyone else did, and then he took ownership for his actions. So, glad for Harrison Ford of that. Um, Next thing we're to talk about is, Jet and ForeFlight. Jeppesen is the leading company in aeronautical data company and nav data company in the world. Jeppesen sets the standard for aeronautical charts, approach plates, and all of their aeronautical data. Jeppesen offers us flight planning services for airlines. My original airline, our flight planning system was a Jeppesen flight planning system. American Airlines has a Jeppesen flight planning system software. Jep is in the back of everything. It is a Boeing company, but Jeppesen started way, way back, um, back in the literally the time when pilots navigated using concrete arrows and bonfires. That's how long Jeppesen's been around. So that company, it just announced, I believe it was yesterday, that they are going to join partnership with ForeFlight. And ForeFlight is the leader in electronic flight bags for private pilots. And now you're gonna be able to get the JEP charts and the JEP data, and Jeppesen is giving their whole nav database to ForeFlight, and in turn, ForeFlight is helping them with their application. When I got back in the flying, I started with JEP because I really, really love the JEP product and their charts and all that. That's what I've been used to for the last 10 years. But their app was not as good. So I went to ForeFlight, and I really, really like the ForeFlight. But the downside on the ForeFlight aspect of things is it uses the government charts, which have gotten good, but they're not the same quality as the Jeppesen charts. So now finally there's this go between, and you're going to be able to see them both. So let's watch this little video that off the ForeFlight page that they put out.
There is nobody who has better data than Jeppesen, and our customers have asked for that both here in the US and abroad.
The number one question that I oftentimes get from pilots is, when can I get the JEP charts that I love on ForeFlight?
We've always thought, without a doubt, if we could ever get the power of the Jeppesen charts and data with the design and features of ForeFlight, that pilots would be amazed, impressed, and blown away.
They invest in the application, we've invested in the data, and here's an opportunity to bring both those things together.
We're going to bring the best charts in the world to the ForeFlight app you know and love.
ForeFlight customers today will be able to get access to data coverage around the globe.
Being able to view your Jeppesen chart on an iPhone is something that we are extremely excited about.
We'll be making it much simpler to buy Jeppesen coverage.
They can manage all their subscriptions in one place and get access and go fly.
I'm so excited about what we're doing together and how we're meeting that need of the general aviation community first, and then moving on into other markets, and the collaboration that we can bring there.
We're not stopping here, and we've got many years ahead of us to continue to innovate and deliver technologies that leverage the strengths of both of our organizations to continue this mission of delivering pilots and flight operations tools that make flying easier, safer, and a joy.
So I'm very, very excited about this. I think this is huge. Um, Not available right away. I can't go and link the two right now, but they said sometime this summer. So, um, again, very, very excited. I think this is a great partnership between two giants in the aviation industry, and especially general aviation. And this isn't just going to help GA. This is not just going to help general aviation pilots. Starting first quarter of 2018, uh, ForeFlight is helping Jeppesen redo their Flight Deck Pro app. So there'll be a brand new Flight Deck Pro app that's going to be coming out for all of that. So that's a huge thing. Um, it's also gonna be interesting to see how this, turns out. Um, ForeFlight is strictly a, Apple iOS company. Their application is only available for Apple products, and there are some airlines that do not use Apple products as their iPad. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens if those airlines are gonna get the same updates, or if those airlines are gonna have to change to an Apple product in order to keep using Flight Deck Pro. It'll be interesting to see what happens on there. Um, but that pretty much wraps that up. And then finally, the last big thing is Garmin. Garmin Pilot, improves its global features, and this is great for those that fly in Europe, because this is what, it does. Garmin Pilot, which is another app, another electronic flight bag, made by Garmin, the same GPS people. Um, their new version 8.7 adds Euro control auto routing and flight plan filing. So Euro control, see if I can say this in the most politically correct way. Euro control is a very congested area of airspace, and flights between certain airports require to be on exact routing. Like, if you're not this way on this exact route between here and here, your flight plans are not going to go in the system. It's going to be rejected. So this is a big deal for those that use Garmin Pilot and those that fly instruments in Europe. Now that now it'll say, "Hey, I'm at this airport. I'm going to this airport." It'll find the route for you that will get accepted into Eurocontrol, and it will also file your flight plan. So those are big, huge things, um, for that, for those pilots over there in Europe. And it just goes to show, and I have a feeling that ForeFlight is gonna be offering the same thing now that they're with Jeppesen. So, again, this is, great news, great innovations in the general aviation world, for the electronic flight bags. Life's becoming easier there. So, with that, that's gonna wrap up the news, and, we're gonna play this bumper. Now, these next 2 bumpers, but, on each side of the, interview with Max Trescott are new. They're new bumpers, and they were, recorded by my oldest son, John Michael. So, here we go. All right, I'm here with Max Trescott. Max is a full-time flight instructor. He's a Cirrus Platinum instructor and specializes in teaching the Cirrus aircraft. He started flying at the age of 15 and finished his private certificate in college. He has degrees in electrical engineering, psychology, and an MBA. He spent 25 years working in sales and marketing for Hewlett Packard and lives in Mountain View, California, in Silicon Valley. 12 years ago, he left HP and now devotes full time to teaching flying, writing, consulting, and giving speeches and seminars. He has written 2 books, including Max Trescott's G1000 Glass Cockpit Handbook, now in its 5th edition, He is a co-host for a very popular and very professional Airplane Geeks podcast. And he's recently started his own podcast called the Aviation News Talk, which is focused exclusively on general aviation. In 2008, he was named by the FAA as the National Certified Flight Instructor of the Year to represent the 96,000 CFIs in the United States. Welcome to the Flying in Life podcast, Max.
Michael, thanks for having me here.
It's no problem. So that's a lot, man. You're busy.
Well, yeah, but I'm an old guy, right? I've had 100 years to do all that.
Well, that's true.
Wait a minute. Hey. You watch that, young man.
You are a mature and very well respected CFI. How about that?
But not yet a senior citizen.
So, how did you get in this whole flying business? When did you get your pilot certificate? When did you get your CFI? What made you leave the tech world and do the aviation business?
Well, I was lucky. I was one of those people that got bit by the bug early. A lot of folks have the experience. You look up the sky at age 6 or 7, and you go, "Whoa, what's that? I want to do that." And I was lucky that my mom would take my sister and I out to the airport for one of those cheap demo flights where we fly around town for 15 minutes, and I was hooked. So I started taking flying lessons when I was 15 and finished the license when I was 19 in college. And then went off to a career at HP. I spent 25 years there. It's kind of funny. I was involved in radio stations throughout high school and college. I worked for about 5 different commercial radio stations. And in the summers, I used to work for CBS. They owned about a dozen radio stations around the country, and they owned at that time 2 stations in Philadelphia, so WCAU AM and FM. So I spent my summers working for them. Most of the jobs were behind the microphone. For CAU, I was on the engineering side. Had a wonderful time. But when I got out of college, I kind of had to decide, well, do I stay in radio or do I go into this high tech thing, which looks kind of fun and interesting. So I did the latter and really enjoyed that, and just kind of flew. Oh, I would say on average when I was at HP, maybe 30, 35 hours a year. So not a whole lot, but just enough to keep my hand in it on weekends. And then how I became a CFI is just really odd. A friend of mine at one point said to me, "I'm getting my CFI, you should too." I mean, literally, those are his words. And I said, sounds like a good idea. And I'd never really thought about doing it before. So that was about 3 years before I left HP. And I did that over the course of a summer. The job I had at that particular time was in sales, and it was good luck and bad luck. That was just happened to be the one time when they gave me a terrible territory where I knew I wasn't going to sell much. So I had the time available, and had great fun, learning to become a flight instructor. And then I used to teach on weekends. So I would, every Saturday and Sunday, I'd be out at the airport, teaching 8 hours a day, then go back to work, at the HP Monday through Friday. Anyway, then ultimately they had a downsizing, and I was able to take advantage of that, which meant they threw me out of the company because the last couple years had not been fun. There was a big merger that had made life a little bit more difficult. So then I kind of hit upon the idea of, maybe I should write a book. So that's kind of how I got here.
Gotcha. So you're also a Cirrus Platinum instructor. How do you what is a Cirrus Platinum instructor? How do you get that title?
Yeah, so the Cirrus has a program that they've had for, probably at least 10 years. This for Cirrus Standardized Instructor Pilots, CSIP. And basically, that means that an instructor has gone through factory training, or in some cases, an instructor can get that training at a local Cirrus certified training center. And it essentially means that this is somebody who really understands the ins and the outs of Cirrus aircraft. So I became a CSIP about 10 years ago, and then become a Platinum CSIP you need around 2,000 hours of time in the aircraft. Plus, you need to be a very active flight instructor. So in other words, you might have 2,000 hours, but if you didn't do a lot of teaching in the last year, you're not going to get your platinum, or you're not going to be able to renew it. And these days, probably 50%. Last year, it was more than 50% of my hours are spent mostly in the right seat of the Cirrus. So I spent a lot of time working with people around the country. And in fact, I'll be headed back to Knoxville, Tennessee in a few weeks. There's a national program they call CPPP, so the Cirrus Pilot Proficiency Program, which is run by COPA, the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association. And occasionally I will teach at these at different locations around the country. And it's a great opportunity both for pilots to, get an intensive weekend of ground instruction combined with flight instruction if they choose. So for me, that's really fun to go teach at those occasionally.
It sounds like, in just listening to you talk, that the whole Cirrus brand is kind of more of not just an airplane, but also a community of Cirrus owners, and the manufacturer themselves really want to make sure that the people that operate their aircraft are really well trained and to use them.
Yes, I think that Cirrus is not unique in being a community. I've found other communities for other aircraft types, but I would say that the Cirrus community is probably one of the most enthusiastic, one of the most organized, and also one of the kind of the techiest, in the sense that they've got a lot of members with the kind of computer skills that they can put together, amazing websites and membership sites, and put together, just a high level quality of program. And I think initially a lot of that came out of owners, more so than the factory in the early days. But as time moved on, I think the factory came to really understand and embrace the importance of it. So yes, the two groups now, both the factory and the owner group, will work together, hand in glove. And I would encourage anybody who is flying a Cirrus, even if they're just renting a few hours a year, join COPA. It's at cirruspilots.org. And here's the reason why. This is pretty interesting to me, and also surprising. When the COPA group looked at the accident rate of their members and they compared it with non-members, and fully 50% of all the Cirrus pilots out there, the best they can estimate, belong to the organization. Members had a fatal accident rate which is about half that of non-members. And you look at that and you go, whoa, that's pretty amazing. Now, you wouldn't get that benefit just by joining and doing nothing. People who join usually are active on the forums, and they read the magazine, and they may go to a CPPP like the one I just described. But it really pays great dividends.
Well, yeah, it kind of makes sense too. A good pilot's always continuing to learn, and if you have this availability to learn a very complex single engine aircraft. I mean, you look at what a Cirrus is. A Cirrus isn't a 172. You don't have a simple six pack in a Cirrus. You have a very robust avionics suite that you almost need a techie person kind of to learn. And you've actually done that, and you've kind of become an expert in the G1000 and the Cirrus perspective. Can you describe the avionics? My Beach Musketeers, I'm still an analog guy. I call it a beer aircraft. It's got a six pack that comes with it. There's no glass at all. What does the G1000 do besides make pretty glass panels in front of me?
Well, there are a lot of advantages to glass in general, and to the G1000 and the perspective in particular. I would say some of the biggest benefits are that these aircraft typically have some of the safety systems that you might buy individually, but you can have them all together in one panel. So all of these systems have traffic, which in a busy area where I am here in the San Francisco area, that can be a lifesaver. Having active traffic system in the cockpit is just essential. We've got weather information, which of course you could get separately, but which the G1000 and perspective integrate nicely and display it right there on your moving map. We also have terrain displays, which is pretty important in a mountainous area like San Francisco, where we also have fog, because that's just a deadly combination. So at night, I always encourage people to have the terrain displayed so that they can avoid the red spots and the yellow spots on the map. And then from an ergonomics standpoint, an ease of use standpoint, the scanning of the instruments for particularly instrument flight is just much less work, and it's much easier on your eyes. And so it's far easier to fly a glass cockpit aircraft in an IFR environment than it is for round gauges. And what I've seen when training people in the IFR, with people who are flying in round gauge airplanes, it really takes them the full 40 hours to be ready for a check ride. In glass, I often see people who are ready in 30 hours or less, and then we're just kind of flying off the last 10 hours because it's like, oh yeah, we just gotta get the hours in. And what I've concluded is that the layout of the flight instruments is such that you can just easily sweep your eyes from kind of the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. And in that sweep, you pick up all 4 pitch instruments. So you're going to see airspeed, you're going to see the attitude indicator, you're going to see the altimeter, and you're going to see the vertical speed indicator. Whereas in a round gauge airplane, you're going to have to look at 4 instruments in a triangle. Each of those round instruments is surrounded by a border, and then there's a space of an inch or two between the next instrument. I think that it's much harder in those kinds of environments to make your eye focus on each of those individual instruments and then have it jump the boundaries between instruments to get to the next one. In the glass panel, your eye just seamlessly moves from one to the next with no interruptions. So I think that's why glass aircraft are just much easier to fly, in the sense that you instantly know what position the aircraft is. Take the attitude indicator, for example. Typical round gauge attitude indicator in a 3 1/8 inch hole is going to be maybe about 2 inches wide, that little airplane. Whereas in the PFD, now your attitude indicator is the full 10-inch wide screen. And I can be sitting in the back of one of these aircraft, and I can tell if the airplane is banked 1 degree. You can't really do that nearly as easily with the traditional attitude indicator.
Yeah, and I just know that doing all my instrument stuff 10 years ago, there really wasn't any glass out there, or the glass, all the Garmin products were just starting to become developed at that point. But I agree seamlessly with you that single panel airline type what I'm used to on the Airbuses, when I jump seat, and that you have just all your stuff is right there. There's no jumping your eye between attitude, airspeed, attitude, turn, attitude, heading, and you're just bouncing back and forth constantly like you are with a six pack. So that's really interesting. You have a book, your G1000 book. What does that go through?
Well, everything. No, I came back from training at Cessna back in about 2005, I believe, or early 2006, and I just had a ton of notes. And I was still kind of struggling with the system. Like, I kind of wondered, why am I having so much difficulty with this? And I thought, I just don't have great reference materials. So I started putting notes together, and 2 months later, I had the first version of the book. Took a couple more months to edit it, then a few more months to go through the printing process and distribution and so on. But I really wanted something that was easier to read than the manual. When I was in the factory at Hewlett Packard, on the marketing side initially, I knew some of the folks that did the manuals, and there's kind of tech writing is a very, very special skill, and you can see that the manuals for most of the avionics manufacturers are kind of written in that kind of traditional way. And often what they'll do, and I'm not saying they do this all the time, but often they'll just kind of go through the knobs, from either left to right or top to bottom or things like that. And yet I thought it would be more helpful to organize the information kind of in the way that pilots think, and kind of group the functions, that are related together, and not just kind of do, left to right, top to bottom, and so on. So my goal really was to organize the information in a way that pilots would think about it. And it's proved to be incredibly successful. It's sold, around the world. It's in its 5th edition now. And so, yeah, I get a lot of great feedback that a lot of people kind of refer to it as the Bible, and they'll carry it in the airplane. And there's a massive index in the back. It's about 8 pages of index. So it's really easy, if you have a question, just to kind of look in the index and go, I go to page 221, and boom, there's the answer.
So it's not only just a book about the G1000, but people who have G1000s really can use your book as almost an on-hand Google of, how I know this thing does this. How does it do it again? And you can search it pretty quickly then.
Yeah, exactly. So it's used for people who are just learning the G1000. It's a great way to kind of bring all that information into your mind and organize it in a way that makes sense. And then people just continue to use it later because it's impossible to remember all that stuff. I think that's one of the big differences with glass cockpits from round gauge airplanes. Historically, people might not fly for a month. They go jump in the airplane. Hey, you still knew how to use the VOR and everything else. That's not quite the case these days with the things like the G1000 and GPSs and things like that. I think that people are finding that it really helps to review a little bit between flights, just because it's hard to remember everything.
Right, and it is a complex system. A lot of people view a CFI in flight instruction almost as a transition rating. It's something you get to build hours. You're a CFI to build enough time to get to now the 1,200 or 1,500 hours that's needed for you to get your ADP to move on to an airline career. How do you make a career out of being a CFI?
Well, first of all, you got to like it, and enjoy working with the people, and really view it as something that is kind of important to you. But then there are a few other things as well. I think that it's really difficult to be a career CFI, for example, unless you've got kind of a larger population to draw from. And that doesn't mean that you have to live in a city. I know flight instructors that make great livings, and they live in smaller towns, but they also travel a lot. So, for example, I'm thinking of a lot of my friends who are Cirrus CSIP instructors. Some of them, like me, live here in the metro areas where we have huge populations. We have just lots of opportunity to fly with people. But others live in more remote areas where there might not be that many people who are flying, and they'll be traveling 1 or 2 weeks out of the year to go meet with people and move their airplanes around the country, or to give them intensive training in a particular place. So I think for anybody who's really looking to make a career as a flight instructor, a couple of things. One, it helps to be an independent, self-employed flight instructor. Now, you might not do that initially. You might work for a flight school or an FBO and get experience that way. But ultimately, people are going to be able to earn more per hour if they're independent, as opposed to if they're being paid as an employee. But then to be an independent flight instructor, I think it really helps to be specialized. And then that was really my goal as a flight instructor, was not to be a jack of all trades. I think it's if you lived, for example, in a very small town, you'd have to be a jack of all trades unless you traveled, because you'd have to do whatever people needed done. But if you specialize, then you can become more expert in a particular area, and then you can start to attract clients that are outside your area. So I think being independent, specializing, and being able to access a large group of clients really, really helps. If you're living in a small town and you just fly with the people that come in the door, boy, that's going to be hard to make it as a career flight instructor.
For you as a flight instructor, what is your uh, biggest reward or biggest challenge when it comes to students?
Well, the reward is easy. The reward is just sharing in their success. Every time somebody solos, I'm almost as excited, as they are. Not quite. I mean, it would be hard to be that excited, but I really enjoy helping people achieve their goals. And so, if you have a kind of a bond with your clients and you want them to succeed, you become kind of part of their success, and that's very rewarding. I mean, I just really enjoy helping other people achieve their flying objectives. And as for challenges, people ask me all the time, "Boy, you must be dangerous. People must be always trying to kill you." And it's like, no, that's pretty rare, actually. So I would I would say sometimes the challenge is just fitting everything into 24 hours. But I think everybody has that challenge, no matter what they do.
Right, I would agree. You were named the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. How does one get that honor, and what has it meant to you?
Well, so the thing that became clear to me was I was not chosen because I was the best flight instructor, in the country at the time. I was really chosen just to represent flight instructors and to promote flight instruction as a career or as a vocation for folks that are just kind of passing through it. And so it felt like a good fit in that sense, in that I think flight instructors are really the backbone of general aviation, and to some extent even commercial aviation, because none of those people got to fly those airliners without quite a few flight instructors along the way. And so in terms of the process, there are probably, I don't know, 60 FSDOs, FAA FSDOs around the country. Each one nominates a local flight instructor every year. And then that goes to the region. I think there are 9 regions. So here in California, we're part of the Pacific Western region, or maybe the Western Pacific region. I never remember which it is. And then they select somebody from among the FSDOs in their region. So then you have 9 finalists, if you will. And then there's an industry committee that gets together, and that committee has representatives from major associations like AOPA and places like that, and they do the final selection. But I've really tried to use this as a way to, at every opportunity, recognize flight instructors. So whenever I give a presentation, it often comes up, oh, he's the 2008 Flight Instructor of the Year. At the very beginning of the presentation, I usually ask the flight instructors in the room to stand up, and then I make sure the audience applauds for them, because I honestly don't think flight instructors get the recognition that they deserve. On the other hand, I really want to encourage people who love aviation and who also want to, up their game, who want to, learn to get even better at aviation, to become flight instructors, because I think the industry can use the gray-haired experienced flight instructor as much as they can, use the 18-year-old incredibly enthusiastic headed to the airline someday flight instructor.
No, absolutely. And when you go and you get your CFI, it just makes you a better pilot, because you can be a good pilot and you think you know everything, and then you have to now try to take that knowledge and regurgitate it and spit it out to people. And it's not just to a single person, flight instructor. You almost have to tailor every single lesson to the student you have at that time. I mean, you can have a student that's just a natural and you can fly through your syllabus, or you can have a student that is really having a hard time with it, and then you now have to try to develop a different way to teach them to that up skill level they need.
Boy, what you said just resonates with me so much. You said, you think you know everything, and I remember that as well. I thought, oh yeah, I read all the magazines, I fly a lot, I know it all, and then I started studying, to become a flight instructor, and then it was like, whoa, there's a lot of information out there that that I didn't know, and I would assume other pilots don't know until they have to read all the material you need to prep for the flight instructor rating. And then you're right about tailoring. I think every customer that you run into, every client has individual needs, and it's important for the flight instructor to kind of figure out, how do I get this, communicate this information to them in a way that's going to help them best understand it. And everybody needs to help in different areas. So yeah, I think flight instructors are kind of like analysts or even doctors. We're trying to diagnose the situation and figure out how to help people overcome the problems they're having.
Yeah, I think Jason Chapper, when I interviewed him down at Sun and Fun last week, he said that CFI is a lot like being a psychologist, because you have to really, really analyze a person to really understand what they needed.
Exactly.
Um, Now, a lot of people know that you're a co-host on the Airplane Geeks podcast, which, if someone's listening to this podcast and has not listened to the Airplane Geeks, you need to pause me right away and go listen to that show, because I think you guys set the standard for aviation podcasts. You guys, you and Max and Rob and David, all put out a very high quality, very professional podcast in there. But you also just started your own podcast, the Aviation News Talk podcast. Tell me a little bit about it. Why'd you start it, and the name?
Oh, sure. So first of all, I am indebted to my co-host on the Airplane Geeks podcast, because over the past almost 3 years, I have learned so much from working with them. If I had started a podcast on my own without having first spent the time with them, wow, it would not be, it would probably not be as good a show as I think the new one is. But I started it because every day that I'm flying, and I'm usually in the air, 5, 6 days a week. And last week it was 7 days a week. So I spend a lot of time flying, but I'm always constantly encountering things in the air where I think, oh, I really want to share that with people. That's really important. And so I really felt that I just had a lot of information, not only not often not the kind of mainstream stuff that you might read in the magazine or in the book, but some of the more subtle things that really could make a difference for people in flying. So if I look at the format for Airplane Geeks, wow, we cover a lot of territory. Not only do we cover general aviation, but we cover the airlines heavily. We also cover military, and there's just not time to talk about all the things that I was interested in talking about related to general aviation. So I really wanted to put together a show that was focused strictly on GA. Didn't talk about all the other kinds of things going on in aviation, and focused both on the news, which I love, but also looked at flying tips and presented those in a way that they would be helpful for both beginners and expert alike. So, for example, the last show, when I got to the tips section, I talked about a screw up that I had made the prior weekend, and I talked about how that was associated with distractions. And then I spent about 10 minutes talking about what I've researched and learned about distractions in the cockpit over the last 10 years. So that's kind of a typical show format. Talk about the news, and I do both international news and light sport news and experimental news. And so that runs maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we spend time on a flying tip of some kind. So it runs about 30 to 40 minutes. And I called it Aviation News Talk because I have always loved the news talk radio format. When I worked for WCAU in Philadelphia, that was a news talk station. My favorite station here for many years in the San Francisco Bay Area was a news talk station. So Aviation News Talk just felt like it would fit. So I'm having a great time talking with my news talkers.
Yeah, no, and it's a great show, and it is a good, it is kind of refreshing to just have a GA show, and one could think like, oh, general aviation news, there can't be that much to talk about, or I wonder how often he's gonna be able to do a episode. But you're what, 4 episodes in to your new podcast now, and I'm just absolutely shocked and amazed on how much news you actually get to talk about at the first start of your show. It's like I didn't realize that there was that much general aviation news out there at all.
Yes, and I think I was a little surprised myself as well, and other people had said to me, "Oh, well, probably won't have that much from week to week." And I kind of thought, wow, I might struggle to find 4 or 5 stories each week. And then it's like, well, last week I probably covered about 9, and I had 2 that I couldn't get to, and those are being saved for next week. And those may not get mentioned if there's other stuff. So it's really amazing if you spend the time digging around the world. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in general aviation, and it was a surprise to me, but it's been a fun surprise, and it's just great sharing all that information with listeners.
So is your podcast going to be a weekly thing, a semi-weekly thing? Is it going to be something that I can make sure and like clockwork every Wednesday? It's when I wake up in the morning, there's going to be a new podcast. You're going to have a specific release date, or?
Yes, my target is weekly, and then kind of occasional bonus episodes, if you will. So target's to get it out on Tuesdays. Often it's going to be later in the day on Tuesday. So you could probably count it on as a Wednesday wake up for sure. And then I do other bonus episodes. So we did one on Fly Auto, which is a charter on-demand charter service. And I talked with the founder in the context of how could Fly Auto have helped United solve that incredible problem that they had with dragging a passenger off in Chicago. And I've got another bonus episode coming up next week where I'll be talking with one of the avionics manufacturers about a really interesting new product. So yeah, I look at the Tuesday show as kind of the regular one, and then every few weeks we'll throw in a bonus episode on Thursday or Friday as well.
Well, that's great. So, Max, where can people find you online, find out about your show and your Garmin books and things like that?
Sure. Aviationnewstalk.com is probably the best place to go. In the upper right corner, I've got links there to the online courses that I offer for G1000 and WAS training. And then you can always just go to iTunes or Google Play or any of the other places where fine podcasts are found. Doesn't that sound like a commercial? And just type it in.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on my show. And if you haven't had a chance to go check out Max's new podcast, I would highly recommend it. It's kind of a thing that all these people coming out with great new aviation podcasts, I'm running out of bandwidth and time travel to actually listen to them all. So thank you for your new podcast. It's a great one. It's definitely on my playlist every time it comes out.
Well, Michael, thanks so much for reaching out to me, inviting me to come onto your show here. So it's been very enjoyable. Thanks so much.
All right, no problem. Thank you. All right, that was a great interview with Max. Like again, if you haven't checked out his show and you're a general aviation pilot, it is full of great knowledge. He just had his last episode, his last bonus episode, really walked through how he was gonna go reposition an airplane from Central California down toward in the Bay Area down towards Texas, and he spent about 20, 30 minutes going through what he looked at for the flight planning process, what he was looking at wind-wise, altitude, turbulence, pretty much went through the whole entire flight planning process, going through that flight planning for that flight. So, and then he also talked about what he takes and the um, equipment and things he takes along on a long cross country like that. A lot of good tips in there. A lot of stuff I learned from that episode. So go ahead and take it out. It's over at aviationnewstalk.com and go look at, like you said, however you get your podcast app, just search Aviation News Talk and describe it. Again, it's a absolutely great show. All right, I solicited some feedback from Jen Niffer from over on the Tales from the Terminal blog. She went on April 18th to Dayton to where they had a bunch of B-25s, Mitchell bombers for the anniversary of the Doolittle raid, which happened April 18th, 1942. And I asked her to send some feedback about that. This was the 75th anniversary on the attack. So she's going to go a little bit into some history and what she heard and saw at the event.
Hello, Flying in Life podcast listeners. It's Jen Niffer here. And for those of you who don't know me, I work for a medium-sized Midwestern airport. You can usually find me hanging around in the accounting department. But this past winter, you could also find me hanging around on the de-ice pad. About a week ago, I made a trip over to the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, to see the B-25 Mitchell bombers, which were in town to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Doolittle raid. And Mike asked if I could share a little bit about my visit and what I saw while I was there. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Doolittle raid, let's start with a little history lesson. And for those of you who are also Airline Pilot Guide listeners, let me just give you a little warning that I am nowhere near the storyteller that Captain Nick is, so I apologize in advance. So, after the attack at Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt was determined that the fight should be taken directly to Japan. And he wanted the military to figure out a way to conduct a bombing raid on the Japanese mainland. The thinking was this would boost the morale of the US people, and at the same time, it would let the Japanese know that they were not untouchable. But the US had no bases close enough to be able to launch a bombing strike. And at the same time, they really didn't want to risk the carriers because in order to launch a strike from them, they'd have had to get really close to the Japanese mainland. And since so much of the fleet had just been decimated in Pearl Harbor, they really didn't want to risk sending the carriers in so close. So it was decided that B-25 bombers, which are a land-based airplane, would be the best plane to use. And Jimmy Doolittle was tasked with the responsibility of figuring out how to launch these airplanes from a ship, and then, of course, also with coordinating the actual attack. So the B-25s, in order to be able to launch them from a ship, they had to be pretty heavily modified. They shed as much weight as they could by removing things like the tail guns. And I read somewhere that they painted broomsticks and stuck them in so it looked like the airplanes had tail guns, but they really didn't have the tail guns. They took those out. They also had to add extra fuel tanks and fuel bladders to extend the range of the airplane. On April 16th, 16 of the B-25 bombers were loaded onto the USS Hornet. And then on April 18th, 1942, they took off and flew just over 800 miles to Japan to bomb Tokyo. Now, the planes were supposed to then fly on and land at bases in China, but unfortunately, they had been forced to launch earlier than planned, which meant they had to fly farther than planned to get to Japan. And so they were very low on fuel, and they ended up ditching in various locations rather than making it to China the way they had hoped. The raid didn't cause a whole lot of physical damage, but it really had a huge psychological impact, which was just as Roosevelt had intended. So I heard that the U.S. Air Force Museum would be holding a special commemoration of the raid, and that a number of B-25s were going to fly in to participate. So I decided it would be well worth the trip to travel to Dayton to go check out the planes. Now, I've been to the Air Force Museum before, and I had read that the airplanes would be on display out behind the building somewhere. So I went to the museum first. In front of the museum is Memorial Park, and that's where the actual ceremony was going to be held. And I could tell by the traffic on the way in that a lot of people were going to be there, which I think is really great. I was pleased to see so many people showing up in the middle of a day on a Tuesday. However, unfortunately for me, I found out that you couldn't get to the airplanes from the museum. Actually, I had to get back in my car and drive around to where the airplanes were parked. This is actually a really short drive, but the traffic was insane, and it took me over an hour to get over there. And I actually was really afraid that I wasn't going to get there at all because they were closing the display at noon so that they could prepare the planes to do a flyover. Fortunately, I managed to get there with about a half an hour to spare, so I got there right at 11:30. There were 11 airplanes in total, which had flown in from all over the country to participate in the commemoration. I had read that the B-25 could be set up in a variety of configurations, so it actually was really neat to see that each of the airplanes is a little bit different. Some of them had so many guns sticking out of them. I think I read they could have up to 14 forward-facing guns, but they looked like, flying porcupines. Others had sort of the clear glass nose where you would envision maybe they had, bombing personnel who would be sitting in there, able to look out as they were, preparing to launch bombs. Seeing these planes in person, I have to say it really sort of drove home for me just what an accomplishment it was to launch these airplanes off of aircraft carriers. They are clearly, not designed to be naval airplanes. And I read that the fact that they used these land-based planes was sort of part of the mind game that they wanted to play with the Japanese. They wanted the Japanese to see these land-based airplanes bombing them and really wonder, oh my goodness, where the heck did these airplanes come from? Now, I did take a bunch of pictures, and I'm going to send some of them to Mike so he can put them in the show notes if you want to go ahead and check them out and see what some of the airplanes looked like. I really wish that I could have gotten some interviews and taken a little more time to learn the history of each plane that was there. But unfortunately, the late arrival really made that impossible. And I really just had, barely enough time to take a good look around before they closed the area and we all had to leave. Originally, I had really hoped that I would be able to get back over to the museum for the ceremony, but there was just no way to get over there. The traffic was just ridiculous. So instead, I settled down in a nearby parking lot, which I was positioned in such a way that I could sort of see the runway behind the tree line. And it allowed me to watch each of the planes take off. And I have to say how much I love the sound of those old engines. There's just nothing else in this world that sounds like that. And as I watched each plane take to the air, I really thought yet again about what it must have been like to take off in one of those airplanes from a ship. I have seen some old video footage, and I have to say it looks pretty intense. I read that those crews didn't know what the target was going to be until after they were on the ship and well on their way. And then they were told that they were going to bomb Japan, and they were given an opportunity to step out if they didn't want to participate. And not a single one of those crew members stepped out. They all wanted to participate in this raid. I was really fortunate that the flyover came right above where I was sitting. I looked up and I thought about what it must have been like to be in Japan on that day and to see those planes flying overhead. It was a really intense and touching moment to think about what those aviators accomplished on that day. Over at the museum, the last remaining survivor of the raid was being honored, and I really can only imagine what he must have thought seeing those bombers fly over in formation. After the flyover, I really had to leave because I had to get home and it was a long drive. So as I was leaving, I could see that people had filled up all the parking lots and had parked all along the side of the roads just to be able to see the B-25s. And I found that to be so encouraging that so many people took time out in the middle of a workday to come and see those airplanes and to honor what they did 75 years ago. Now, if you're going to Oshkosh this year, you are in luck. They are going to be doing a commemoration at Oshkosh as well. I'm going to be there. I believe Mike is going to be there. Hopefully some of you will be there as well. I understand there are going to be 16 B-25s at Oshkosh, so I'm really looking forward to that. So that's my story. Thank you so much for letting me share it. If you are interested in checking out my other adventures in aviation, please feel free to check out my blog. It's talesfromtheterminal.com. Thanks again. Have a great day.
All right. Again, Jen, thank you so much for reporting for me and sending that in. I wish I could have been up there in Dayton to see it too, but as you mentioned, they will be up there in Oshkosh, and so will I. So I can't wait to see the B-25 and the same commemoration up there at Oshkosh. So looking forward to that. So there's one more thing I want to talk about, feedback. I forgot to put that back in the news, but this came out yesterday. It was a Southwest Airlines pilot for 22 years of his career, 20 years of his career, I believe. He has kept record of the number of passengers that he has flown, which I don't think anyone has really thought about ever doing. At least I probably wouldn't have thought about it. But he flew his millionth passenger um in the other day, and it made this little video recording. So let's go ahead and play this real quick. It's a great a good aviation airline story.
Make one special announcement before we go. About 22 years ago, I retired from the United States Air Force, and I had the privilege of flying F-16s, both as a combat pilot and as a test pilot. And for the past 22 years, I've been flying with Southwest. And today is a special day. Ever since I started with Southwest, I've kept track of the passengers I've flown. And today I'm flying my 1 millionth passenger. And in honor of that, I have a bottle of champagne. I have an autographed copy of your boarding card from me. And in addition to that, I did a little bit of snooping, and I found out how much you paid for your ticket. So in an envelope, I have in cash the amount of money you paid for your ticket. And the lucky person is Miss Miriam Krieger.
If you could just go ahead and ring your call light, Miriam. Sorry.
Oh, sweetie. Thank you.
So that was an absolutely crazy and amazing thing. You know, pilots usually um you know take care of hours and stuff like that, but keeping track of the number of passengers you've flown, that's a lot of work or for him, but just keeping track of that and then doing such a kind gesture for his millionth passenger is quite amazing. So um it was great. It's finally a good airline story. So with that, we'll move on to the life section of the podcast real quick. So we'll go ahead and hit this. Life-wise, man, it's been crazy. Ever since coming back from Sun Fun and being away for a week, I was still off of work for another week. So spent a lot of time just really doing nothing, reconnecting with the family, being a husband again, and helping her out around the house. You know, kind of as you've been away for a week now, you kind of now have to. It's almost like I've used all the good graces points and all the brownie points were used up to go away for a week. So I kind of had to go back and make up for and start the brownie point bank uh going again. So I did that. And then the last couple after that week, I started a stretch where I worked 9 out of 10 days at work, which was a feat on its own. It's kind of like the bad part of my schedule. It's great that I swapped in to get 9 day breaks, but the bad part of having 9 day breaks is you now have long stretches of work. So, um, this is my first time of having the bad part, as call it, of working a few days in a row. So we did that. Um, that's why there's so much time between podcasts. Uh, Yesterday was Star Wars, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. It became Star Wars Day. Don't know exactly when that started. So we celebrated that last night in the house. I watched Rogue One for the first time, and if you're a Star Wars fan and you haven't seen Rogue One, I highly recommend it. A lot of people say it's the best Star Wars movie yet. Um, I'd say it's pretty close. It was a great movie. Um, where it falls in the storyline of Star Wars is it's falls just before A New Hope, and that's where the whole premise of the story is them getting the plans for the Death Star, and I almost lost it in the end and started ugly crying. But it was just amazing. I love how the fact that um the story literally goes right into the New Hope, and you see where that movie ends, you can see exactly where A New Hope begins. Um I think I think Disney did a great job with it. It wasn't forced and or anything like that. It was a little slow at the beginning because you just had to learn the new characters because they're all brand new characters. You don't know anything about them, so it was a little forced in the beginning. But by the end, holy cow! And we're watching one of the final battle scenes, and there's a power surge, and all of our power went out, and I was like, no! So we had a little a little interruption there. There's a little more suspense added to the movie than it needed to be. But that went all fine and dandy. And then for for Star Wars Day, we went and got a new Lego to build with the kiddos, and it was um, we got the Millennium Falcon, and not the old Millennium Falcon, but the Millennium Falcon from The Force Awakens. So, comes with about 6 or 7 minifigures. So, it's a 1,000 and almost 1,100 piece Lego. So, we got through bag 1 last night, and we'll go through and continue to work on building the Millennium Falcon. And I've already told the kids, there's 2 type of Lego builders. There's myself, which is a build it once and put it up on the shelf and play with it just a little bit. And that's kind of way John Michael is too. He's kind of that, but he'll play with his Legos a little bit more than I would have. And then there's the Victor Andrew type of Lego person, which is okay, I built it, I can smash it and build it again. And that's the kind of Lego person that really annoys me because you just spent all this time building something and now you just broke it. We talked about we built an airport for Victor's birthday, and with a jet. Um, Last week I almost had to call the NTSB because there were jet pieces scattered all over his room. The airplane was just completely torn apart and all over the place, and he said that the airplane crashed, and so it's it's back in pieces again because that's the kind of Lego kid he is. Um, so yeah, Star Wars is good, Legos is good. The other thing that's been going on, I've been doing this weight loss thing, for about 12 weeks and doing this, weight loss challenge at work and or through the gym at work. And I had my final weigh out. I lost 20 pounds. And again, this wasn't a weight loss challenge. It was more of a fat challenge opposed and a fat loss challenge and a muscle building challenge. So instead of putting you on a scale, they put you in a tank of water and you weighed yourself that way. Um, Lost just about 3.5% of body fat. Almost all of the weight that I lost was fat opposed to muscle, which very excited for. Um, Took a little hiatus off the last week. It kind of fell off the bandwagon, so I'm jumping back on that. But I've gotten to the point, where clothes start to fit nicely again, and actually pants are falling off a bit. So it's a good thing there. And finally, the big thing going on in our life is trying to keep up with the baby. It is amazing how a 9-month-old can get and move so quickly and get into things so very, very quickly. Um, it is just insane how we think we know where she is, and then we have to just go uh, run chase and try to find where Maria Sophia went. Um, it's good, keeps us on our toes. It's really a big help with having 2 big brothers in the house to help her out, help help contain her and things like that. So that's gonna wrap up the life. Not much other to talk about. We're heading down Sunday. We're heading down for another trip down to Mickey Mouse Land, and we're gonna focus on um, not the Magic Kingdom. I think we're just gonna go for the Magic Kingdom just in the evening one night to see Wishes one more time before that show ends. The Wishes show, the Wishes fireworks show is ending down at Disney, and that ends on May 12th. And May 12th they start a new show, and I forgot what that's called, Happily Ever After or something like that. So that's actually changing. So we want to see Wishes one more time, and that's the show at Disney that almost made me cry as well. So I'll see that one more time. We'll get there a good seat so the boys can see it. I'm excited for that. But we're gonna be focusing mainly on Animal Kingdom, Disney Studios, and some more of Epcot. Uh, Epcot's so large with the countries, and that the boys wanna. John Michael especially wants to go and learn more about different countries, and probably because of his tour country in school. So that's gonna wrap that up. Upcoming, we got some interviews already in the can. I got 2 interviews. The next episode, we're gonna be featuring the pre-buy guys, Don and Adam, and then after that, we'll be talking to Carl Valeri from the Aviation Careers podcast and the Stuck Mike Avcast. Uh, we'll be talking to Carl about that, and then um, much like Jennifer did with be going to see the B-25s up in Dayton. I do have someone going down to the wings over Iwala down there in Australia. Probably said that wrong, so that's why he's going to take a voice recorder around and get some stuff about the flying down under. These guys are crazy down there. Not only do they take off upside down, but they fly upside down. That's just a joke because Australia's on the bottom of the world when I look at the globe. So it's kind of fun poking fun at the Aussies. They're great people. So I'm looking forward for Matt doing that to me, for me, not to me. He's doing it for me. If you're going to be out somewhere in an aviation topic, and if you really want to go through and through the time and record something, please do contact me. Let me know what you want to do. I can give you a little bit of little help, some guidance, things like that. More than welcome, just like Jennifer did, just like Matt's going to do. Please send me an email, contact@flyinlife.com. Set something up, send the recording. Very, very open and willing to play anything that anyone wants to send. The more that we share this wonderful world of aviation that we live in, I think we're all better that way. So that's going to wrap it up. I'm going to hit this button here, and you can find show notes for this episode at flyinlife.com/24. You can find me on Twitter at flyinlife, and I kind of broke down and started a Facebook page. So search for Flying in Life on Facebook, hit the like button. Facebook page is on there, so you'll see a lot of pretty much a lot of the same stuff you see on Twitter. You also see it on Facebook as well. So please go ahead and like out there. If you like the show, if you could, feel free, please share it with your friends, or go to iTunes and write a review of the podcast. That helps other people find it as well. So until next time, thank you very much for listening. And I gotta say this: opening and closing the music is from bensound.com. Bumper music is from purpleplanet.com. And again, some of the other bumper music was also from my art classroom piano. You can also find the podcast on Stitcher Radio. And if you like the show and have extra money laying around, check out Patreon, patreon.com. Search for Flying in Life, and if you have a couple extra bucks, feel free to throw them my way. All right, until next time, everybody. Thanks. Woohoo. Now that's over. We'll send a link over in the Twitter group for you people if you guys wanted to hang out real quick. I know it's in the evening over in the UK, so it'd be fun to talk to some of those folks. I need to use the lavatory if the airline allows me to stand up and go. So thanks for listening, everybody. The link will be over there in a couple of minutes.